we found a place where the wilderness met the everyday, where life seemed to be channeled between the land and the sea, and a place where we lost all that sense of anger and bitterness that we'd been carrying, and found something else, found a real deep connection to nature that carried us forwards.
Welcome to the Edinburgh International Book Festival. I'm joined today by author Raynor Winn, who's joining us online to talk about her memoir, The Wild Silence, the sequel to the 2018 bestseller, The Salt Path. Hello, Raynor.
Oh, hi, Sally.
Hi there. Let me tell people just a little bit about The Salt Path before we kind of devote most of our conversation to the Wild Silence. The Salt Path is a riveting chronicle of the walk that Raynor and her husband Moth made a few years ago in their early 50s along the 630-mile southwest coastal path. They weren't just out for the view, though. They'd been thrown out of their beloved farm virtually overnight and were homeless. And Moth had just been diagnosed with a rare degenerative brain disease, which was already making his body seize up. So they walked and walked and walked. The ardours of the coastal walk restored them both in the end in some marvellous ways. And The Wild Silence, this second book, The Wild Silence, tells the story of what happened next. It does it in the same luminous prose and with the same sharp observation that one prizes for The Salt Path. Both books are love stories, exquisitely written love songs to nature and to this amazing man, Moth, shot through with meditations on mortality and our connection with nature. So please, everyone, give another warm welcome to Raynor Winn. Ray, it is lovely to meet you almost, at least virtually, especially as I kind of feel I know you, having read and enjoyed both these books so much. I need to ask you, where are you now?
I'm currently in a B&B in Chepstow. So really sorry I can't be with you at the moment. We're partway through what's become quite an epic walk from the northwest of Scotland in Cape Wrath down to, well, now it seems like we're just walking home to Cornwall. So
you surprised me that you're actually on a walk. I was sitting in the green room there, bemoaning to myself the fact that I had walked through a very wet Edinburgh and my feet were wet. And then I thought, oh my goodness, I'm about to talk to the woman who walked the southwest coastal path and went through such ardours. I can't possibly mention this. Let's just take a few minutes, though, to remind ourselves what that astonishing walk was like. Ray, you carried your home on your backs. You could barely afford to eat half the time, but you both did discover unexpected joys, didn't you, and strengths. Just give us a sense of that walk.
Well, yes, I mean, the walk came as a result of, like you've already said, those really difficult circumstances in our lives where we lost the home, the place we lived for 20 years that we absolutely loved and adored and had put everything into. And then in that same week, Moth had that terminal diagnosis. And we had nowhere to go at that point, absolutely nowhere to go. There was no accommodation available to us. So we just walked, but we walked because I'd spotted a book in a packing case just as we were about to leave the door about a young man that had walked around the southwest coast path with his dog, and just in that awful moment, just the idea of filling a rucksack and going for a walk had seemed like just the most obvious thing to do. But then when we got to that path, what we found was something far more than we could possibly have imagined. We found a place where the wilderness met the everyday, where life seemed to be channeled between the land and the sea, and a place where we lost all that sense of of anger and bitterness that we'd been carrying, and found something else, found a real deep connection to nature that carried us forwards.
But it was incredibly arduous, and all the time you had to fight the very natural instinct to keep Moth sort of still and comfortable and out of pain. Instead, you pushed him to get up and to move and to walk, which was exactly the opposite from what the doctors had said you should be doing, wasn't it?
Well,
I mean,
yes.
How did you know to do that?
Well, I don't think we did, actually. I think when he received his diagnosis, the doctor said there's absolutely nothing that can be done. There's no treatment, there's no cure. So the best thing we can say is don't get too tired and be careful on the stairs, be careful of falls. But there was something in us, something that sort of was driving us towards that sense of needing to be out in the natural world, out in nature, out in a place where we felt safe at a time when everything around us, everything that our lives and our whole world was structured around, it was collapsing and falling apart. We just needed to be in nature, in that place where we felt like we could belong, really. So we didn't know that it was going to help him in the ways that it did. And in fact, there was sort of a sense at the beginning that maybe we were just grabbing a last window of moderately good health before the fast decline into very poor health and the end that had been prescribed for him came. So we didn't know at that point that walk would change everything for us, would change our life, would change his health, would change everything.
And it also changed some of your own attitudes. You were homeless, and you had, at that point, perhaps some of the prejudices that many of us have about homelessness and the kind of people who become homeless. Can you express the kind of a revolution that your thinking went through as you discovered what it was like to have absolutely nowhere to go and to be hungry a lot of the time?
Yeah. Well, we'd never encountered homelessness, really. We'd always lived in very rural places, and homelessness just wasn't something that came into our lives. So I hadn't really given it any thought. But as you said, we had virtually no money, and we had nowhere to go because we were deemed as not being priority case by the local authorities. And there were no friends that were in a position to help us. So as we walked, we really were without a home. We were homeless. And it didn't really strike us as that, because for us at that point in the very beginning of that walk, we were still just us, but without a house. But as we started to walk, and people asked us, how come you've got so much time to be walking so far? And we said, actually, well, it's because we've lost our house. We've got nowhere to go. We're homeless. To find that people actually physically recoiled and almost gathered their children and drew the dogs in on the retractable leads, we realised then that people really did have an awful lot of preconceptions about homelessness that maybe we hadn't previously understood. And it sort of came to a head for us when we were outside a shop, just counting the last few coins that we had in the palm of my hand. And this huge dog came around the corner and caught my rucksack, sent the coins out of my hand, spinning off down the road. And one of them was running into the drainage grill. So I threw myself on the pavement to grab this coin before it fell into the drain. And this woman started poking me with her foot, saying, get up, we don't have people like you here, drunken people in the streets. And for a while I thought, who is she talking to? Just for a moment there, I didn't realise she was talking to me. And then as it came to me that actually this was my life now. This was how things had changed for me. And from only a few weeks earlier, from having our own home and our own business, now I was in this position where people were considering me to be just of some other lower level of society. It was such a shock for that to occur. And I think that was the lowest point for us. That point where we realised that everything had changed, how we lived our lives, how we were viewed, not only within our own lives, but within the wider community, and that everything that I believed myself and my life to be had changed. That was the lowest ebb for us, I think.
You finished the coastal walk at last with Moth's condition much improved, and you were offered a small flat while he went out each day to study on a university course. And this is where we come to the next part of your story, covered by the wild silence. You found it terribly hard to adjust to life indoors. You actually, at one point, took out your old tent, put it up in the living room and slept in there to try and recapture. Well, what was that stage like for you?
Made no sense, did it? We'd come to the end of those months of being wild on the headlands, of having nowhere to live and nowhere to go. And it should have been absolutely perfect to come to a home again, to have a roof, to have, a way back into normality. And yet I just couldn't settle. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't relax, really. And as you said, we even put the tent up in the bedroom, and I slept in that for a while. And I think some of the answer started to come to me at that point when I was sleeping in a tent in a bedroom. That actually, for most of my life, in fact, all of my life since I was a child, I'd had this really close connection to nature. It had been part of who I'd become. And then as Moth and I had got to know each other, it had become part of our time together, was always about time in the natural world. And I began to see that that's what had drawn me to those headlands when we'd lost everything. And it seemed like the most irresponsible and ridiculous thing to do, that it was that connection to nature that had driven us to be there. But then coming back into a house, back off those headlands, it was as if I'd let go of something. I'd let go of the strength that path had given us. And I'd never lived in a village before.
Yes, I was sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to say, Moth also was responding negatively in a way in his physical state to the walk having ended. I think this might be a good time to ask you to read a short extract from The Wild Silence for us, if you have the book there.
Yeah.
It's the point where you're trying to remind Moth about meeting a couple of old men, as you had on the walk, who had introduced you to salted blackberries. And,
yes.
And Moth is not remembering.
Yeah. It was a point when he was working on his degree, and he was starting to lose his memory. He was starting to forget so many things that to me felt so important. So yeah, I'll read you this bit. We sat on a bench. It was early morning, and we just camped on Zenna Head in a field of cows. Two old chaps walked up from the cove below, and one of them had a Tupperware box of blackberries. Please don't forget this. How can you let this slip from your memory? It should be a diamond in your pocket forever, something to hold on in dark days, a fortune in the bank of life. He offered us a blackberry from a box, and we didn't want to take them because the ones we'd eaten up to that point were too tart, too sharp. But that blackberry, it was like nothing we'd ever eaten before. It was rich and purple, autumnal ripeness in a bite, the most perfect taste. That's when he said it. I sat back, waiting for him to remember. Said what? Don't keep me hanging. My throat was tight with tears of loss and fear of loss to come. It almost let go of a moment that hung so brightly on my tree of memory that I could find its glow in any dark place. But for him, that light had dimmed and gone. He explained how those blackberries were like no other, how they got that amazing flavour. How was that? I swallowed hard. This couldn't be happening. If this was gone, what else was gone? He said, you need to wait until the last moment, that moment between perfect and spoiled. And if the mist comes right then, laying the salt air gently on the fruit, you have something that money can't buy and chefs can't create. A perfect, lightly salted blackberry. You can't make them. It has to come with time and nature. They're a gift. When you think summer's over and the good stuff has all gone, they're a gift. Our path, our magnificent walk, it was slipping away from him. Hold on to it, Moth, hold it tight. It's ours, our bright light in a mess of our lives. Don't let it go. It was ours, our gift of time and nature. That's a great story. It's not a story. I watched the gannets, swift and sharp, my mind drifting along the path through the days between Zen Ahead and Land's End. We'd stood on those blocky granite cliffs beyond Land's End with only a few pounds and a Mars bar in our pockets, just the two of us, alone at the edge of the Atlantic. Only the two wet sheets of nylon tent to shelter us from whatever the weather systems threw at us. We could have given up, got on the bus, headed away from the hardships of the path, to sofa surf with friends and family and wait for a council house to become available. But we didn't. Moth's health had improved in ways we'd been told were impossible, and the path had given us something we thought we'd never feel again: hope. We'd held on to that feeling and carried on walking into a future we couldn't see. Shall we carry on? Yes, why not, while the sun's still shining? Hope. I held it warm against my hand, smooth, round, sea-worn pebble of possibility.
Oh, thank you very much, Ray. Thank you. A wee radio ident here, if you'll forgive me. Raynor Winn reading from her book, The Wild Silence, for this Edinburgh International Book Festival event with me, Sally Magnusson. Raynor, it was after that, with Moth declining both physically and mentally, that you decided to write the story of your coastal walk to remind him. And it was a private account, wasn't it, at first? It was to tell him again about the salted blackberries and all these other memories that you were afraid that he was losing. And that, I mean, that account became the Salt Path.
Yeah, it was. I started to write it just for him, just so that I could create a record of that time, so that when those memories really completely slipped away, he'd be able to read it. And I tried as I was writing it to give it a real feeling of him being right there on the path next to me, as if he was walking with me on that path. And that's what it was. It was for him. Just a record of that magical time we'd spent. And I printed it off on the home computer, on the printer, and it started out black and ended up pink as the printer ran out of ink. And I just tied it up with string and gave him it for his birthday, and that's all it was. It was just a record for him of that walk.
Did you know how well you could write when you started? What a lyrical gift you have, what an ear for dialogue. I mean, did you just...
No, I had no idea. No idea. I hadn't written anything since I was a child at school, really. But I gave it to Moth, and then my daughter read it before he did, as kids do. And she said, Mum, this isn't bad. You should do something with it. I said, what do you mean? Like, get a binder for it, or something? And she said, no, idiot, try and get it published. But how could I? I'd never written anything. I'd got no academic record of anything that should point me as being a writer. I had no published work, so it seemed like an impossibility anyway. So
But it wasn't.
But it wasn't.
You know, you got an agent, you got Penguin, a marvelous publisher, and before you knew where you were a best-selling author. You were winning prizes. I mean, what kind of about turn was that in your life?
Yes, it was probably a bigger surprise to me than anyone else, because it was so sudden. Really, it was so sudden that I found an agent within almost 10 days of looking for one, and then within a couple of months, Penguin had picked it up. So it was so sudden. It was so sudden. I didn't really have time to adjust to the idea of what was happening. And then just within 6 months, it had been published. So it was all very rapid. And I think that the hardest thing for me, though, the very hardest thing, was when just before it was published, Penguin told me that I would have to talk about the book, that I would have to actually go out and talk to people about what I'd written. I was horrified. I was absolutely horrified. And I tried to get the book back, but it was too late by then. It was already out there.
Well, you're doing it pretty well now, I must say. The thing about The Salt Path was that not only did it become a bestseller, but it found a very particular reader. You got a message on Twitter, which I think your children advised you to be careful about.
Yes.
And you said, what the heck, I'll just answer anyway. And that changed your life again.
It completely did. Yeah, part of this PR thing that Penguin sprung on me was that I had to do social media, and I had no idea about it. I'd never even looked at it in my life. So I just gave someone my phone number on Twitter, as you do. And so this person got in touch with me, and it turned out to be somebody who had read The Salt Path and had been so personally affected by the story that he felt he had to get in touch. And he said, I have a farm. It's an old cider farm. It's very neglected. It's very overused. But I have this dream of what it could be, that I could bring the wildlife back to it. But I live 200 miles away from it, and I need somebody to live there and to make my dream happen. And I've read your book, and I think you're the one. You're the ones. And we didn't know what to say. It seemed like everything we needed to be able to go back and work on the land on an everyday basis, to spend time in nature all the time. It seemed like what Moth needed most for his health, what we needed for our emotional well-being. And yet to do it, to say yes, would need us to actually believe in someone again, to put our trust into somebody again. And we didn't know if that was even possible. It would need such a leap of faith to actually make that occur, that we didn't know if that was possible to do. And we protracted and procrastinated and couldn't make a decision about what to do. But eventually, we were there one evening, just trying to make the decision. And it was getting dark. And we heard this noise in the hedgerow, and this deer leapt out of the hedge and just stood in front of the house for a moment, just in the twilight, and then disappeared into sort of waist-high weeds and vegetation. And just somehow knew in that moment that it was the right thing to do, because it was worth taking that risk. And so we did. We took that leap of faith and went to the farm.
And it was a right mess, wasn't it? I mean, the farmhouse, I mean, my stomach absolutely turned at what you discovered there. And yet you, Claire, I mean, you're amazing. You just kind of rolled up your sleeves. Mice everywhere.
It was quite a mess. Yeah, it had been sort of not lived in for a while, and it really was extremely damp. It was a bit like a sponge. When it was raining, it would suck it all up, and then when it stopped raining, it let it all out again. And then there were our little four-legged friends in the roof, and there were a lot of them, because you could hear them stampeding around the roof at night. Yeah, so it was. it needed some work, that's for sure.
But you began to, to make your mark on the place, and Moth, crucially, was working outside again. He was standing up straight again. He was remembering better. What do you think was going on medically and indeed psychologically that enabled Moth to start defying his condition again?
Yeah, it was really difficult. I mean, he'd hit such a physical, good, strong point when we came to the end of the salt path. That walk had really changed his health in ways that we thought were only just impossible, because we'd been told it was just a one-way downhill street. There was no way back. But then when he stopped walking and he was studying for his degree, became quite sedentary, as inevitably you are when you're studying, his health really started to decline. Not only was he losing his memory, he was physically going backwards very, very quickly. But we sort of felt that then he needed to be back out in the natural world, back out being physical all the time. But why? We couldn't work out why, and we couldn't get any answer from the doctors really as to why that might be. But then I looked into every bit of research I could find online that might indicate a reason, and there's research out there that shows how connected we are to the natural world, how our bodies actually physically interact with chemicals emitted by plants, and how walking and endurance training had helped people with Alzheimer's, people not the same disease, a very different disease, but in some medical ways connected. And there were little scraps, little snippets of research out there that maybe if you tied them together could point to time in nature, time being actually very physically active could possibly help his health in some way. And so we seized on that. We seized on that as being a possible way forwards, and we started physically, trying to recover the farm from some serious agricultural overuse, and it's taken quite a long time just to remove the agricultural detritus from the farm and allow the place to breathe, almost to allow nature to have its own say again. And now after months, well, what's become years now of being there, it's recovering. Nature is coming back. And where there'd been just a few sparrows in the hedgerows and a couple of crows, now there are so many birds there and wildlife that certainly wasn't there before. There are insects in clouds that didn't exist when we went there, and the raptors have moved in, the buzzards and the hawks and a barn owl. So when they come, you know that the whole food chain is starting to level itself out again, to find its own place.
And you described
yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say you described the beginnings of that process very well in the Wild Silence, magically, actually, your prose. You also talk about the restoring, the restorative effect of nature, of the land on you, and how important that has been to you, the land since childhood. What can you explain what it is that it does to you, to your soul, to your being, this connection you feel with nature?
Yeah, I think as I started to write The Wild Silence, I knew what I was trying to explain, but I couldn't find a way to express it. And it was in writing the book itself that I realised that actually that connection to nature went right back to my childhood, to growing up on a farm, to spending all those formative years being in the woods, in the fields, in the ditches with the voles, or the water voles. And that had been my starting point of my life and my way of thinking. And I think it's when I realised that I realised that actually time spent in nature had been so absolutely fundamental to me and to the formation of my relationship with Moth as well. And it was a really, really difficult thing to try to put into words, to try to describe. And I think that's in the Wild Silence where that those sections where it's almost like a conversation with nature. It's almost a voice of nature that I'm hearing in the background of my thinking. That's where those sections of the Wild Silence came from.
Yeah.
From that sense of being absolutely at ease and at one with the natural world and being absolutely myself, I think.
It's beautifully done. What fascinates me about your story is that you were busy on the farm and observing all the effects of nature that you had been, but you still felt that you and Moth still needed to walk, and you thought, what nice simple place can we tackle next? Ah, yes, we'll tackle the highlands of Iceland just as winter's arriving. You're mad.
Yeah, that was, probably not our best idea.
You did it though.
I think Moth knew that his health had improved, being back working on the land, it had really improved. But he felt he could maybe push it just that little bit further and hopefully see that improvement in his health that he'd seen when we were walking around the coast path. And we had this book, it was called Epic Hikes, and it had these great photographs of these multicoloured mountains in Iceland. And I sort of kept leaving it open on the table, as you do, for weeks. And then suddenly it was that realisation that we had to go there. We had to go and actually see those mountains for ourselves. So we got an off-road bus to the southern highlands of Iceland. At the end of August, we left the UK in an absolute heat wave. We left in T-shirt and shorts and arrived at the start of the Icelandic winter. So that came as a bit of a shock, temperature-wise, for sure.
But it was...
we got off that bus, it was, crazy.
And it was as hard as I could have predicted it would be. I've been going to Iceland all my life. I would never have dreamt of tackling what you tackle. On the other hand, I'm a lazy slob. But you made it through, and you discovered some kind of deep things through it. And there's a moment in Iceland where you reflect on what you call the Earth's fixed impermanence. I mean, how does that... or how did that understanding sort of affect the way that you began to think about your own life and the future?
I think as we walked through Iceland, there was a real sense of almost walking through evolution. We were walking through extinct lava flows, and then through ash fields, and then out of those into like the start of that ash becoming soil, becoming low vegetative growth, eventually into birch groves. And there was a real sense of walking the whole path through evolution, and a sense of the earth rebuilding itself, starting again, regenerating. And in that absolute understanding that the earth does not need us at all. It doesn't need humanity. And whatever happens to humanity, the earth will go on and it will find its own equilibrium. And we are not important to the land, but it is absolutely essential and fundamental to us, to our very existence, our very being. That sense that under our feet there in Iceland was flowing molten rock that was heating the water, that was sending the steam jets up around us. Just that incredible power of the earth to I think I talk about in the book that sense of the earth readying itself to shake us off, just like a wet dog shaking the water from its coat, and that we were that irrelevant to the earth, and yet it was absolutely fundamental to us, and we were not respecting that fact at all. But also, I think it brought me back to the idea of the farm and the way the farm, by simply taking away that human input, was finding its own way back to its natural state. In the same way that Moth had refound his health as he was walking back in his own natural state of being, walking, living, just living on the land, living in a really basic way. And a sense that actually that maybe is a view we need to take of our own future. I've just recently been on a very, very long walk, and walking down through the Pennines, there are long stretches where the Pennines have been incredibly eroded, and the peat was turning into just big motorways of wet bog. And in order to preserve that incredibly important bogland, we've created highways of limestone pavements. And then by putting those limestone pavements in, the vegetation of the boglands, of the peat land, has come back all right back up to the edge of those limestone pavements. And it's a real sense that if we can contain our use of the land, then the land can recover itself. It's about how we exist on this earth, I think.
Is walking, I mean, you've gone in for a rather extreme version of it, but is walking something that you reckon that we could all do with doing more of, especially as we continue to reel from the effect of lockdowns and social isolation? Many of us, of course, are in urban settings, but is there something from your experience that we can all learn from and act on?
I think so. I think walking is something really fundamental to human existence. We are built to walk, and there's something about walking, and especially walking in nature, if that's available to you, that reconnects you to what you are at a really basic level, a really fundamental level, and just by taking the next step and the next step, it sort of sets you free in a way. It allows everything else to recede into the background, and just allows you to just be, to just exist. And as I say, I've been on a very long walk at the moment, and I've met many people who have found through lockdown that they have been drawn outside. They've been drawn to walk, whether it's in the countryside or whether it's in the town, or just to walk. And it's given them time to think. But more importantly, it's given them time to stop thinking. Because there's something about a long walk that allows you to just stop thinking and just be in that moment. And it gives you a sense of peace, a sense of existence. In these really difficult times, especially with everything that's going on at the moment, just time to just be and to just exist. I think it's not only really, really essential for our mental health, it's really essential for our physical health as well, because the one impacts on the other.
One of the keenest lessons you learned or wisdom that you picked up was about the concept of home, of what home is and how little it actually has to do with four walls.
Yeah. I think at the very beginning of all this, when we lost our home, I really thought that I would never feel that sense of home again, that sense of comfort and connection and security that home gives you, because I really thought it was the four walls that surrounded me and that everything that home was contained within that. But then as we were walking on that path, I think I came to realise that actually it's something far, far deeper than that. That home is actually that thing that gives you a sense of safety and of security. And for me, it was being in the natural world. It was being there in the environment. It allowed me, to be who I was. But that and my family, whether they were there, right there on the path right next to me, or scattered across the country as my children were when we were walking. Those two things were the things that, for me, are what home are. It's not about walls. It's not about the things that we fill our homes with. It's something far more fundamental than that.
And what about now, Raynor? How is Moth? How are you? Where are your lives now in the weeks and months since The Wild Silence was published?
Yes, The Wild Silence was published in September last year, wasn't it? And that's been another step down this journey. But then in the spring of this year, we began yet another journey and began walking from Cape Wrath in the northwest of Scotland. And because we're so slow, we're still not home. And I'm currently in Chepstow. Still on my way home.
And are you doing that? Are you doing that because you need to? That you're impelled to do it, or because Moth needs to do it? It needs to keep moving in this sort of way. What's driving you? I mean, these are incredibly long and difficult challenges you're undertaking physically.
I think it's both of those things. I think Moth's health. I think we've come to a point where we realise that we're going to have to walk regularly and quite a long way to keep his health stable, if we can, for as long as we can. But there's something quite addictive about walking as well. We started walking, we were only going to do the Cape Wrath Trail, but we loved our time in Scotland so much. If you've read The Wild Silence, you know how important the highlands have been in our lives, in the story of our lives. And to be back in the highlands again, back in those fantastic wild open spaces, we didn't want to leave it. We just couldn't leave it. And so we came to Fort William at the end of the Cape Wrath Trail, and it was the start of the West Highland Way. So we just had to keep going, and it's kind of gone on from there, really.
Well, I'm going to stop there because I know people will have questions to ask you, Ray. So we have the ability to ask them online, and indeed we have one or two questions in already. Just do it through the website there. And we also have an audience here who I would just invite to raise your hands in the normal manner if you've got a question. So does anybody, first of all, here, does anybody have a question here? So there's a lady down here at the front, and while you're getting ready for that question, let me just ask one of the online ones. Patricia's asking, there seemed to be, Raynor, a sense of peace and positivity at the end of The Wild Silence. Do you still feel that now, and are you able to find it again when you need to? And I think that's connected with the kind of walk perhaps that you're on now.
Yeah. I think that was quite a turning point for us, really, at the end of The Wild Silence, when we sort of found that actually we had found some sort of equilibrium in our lives again, and acknowledged that the natural world really had been so important and continued to be so important, and I think it's holding on to that feeling that takes me back out on these walks, that makes us camp in places we shouldn't, and do the things that we do, because that sense of peace and coexistence with the earth is something really fundamental that is so important in our lives. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Keep the questions coming, and we'll take one from the audience here now.
Hi there, Ray. I've read both your books and loved them. Your writing about nature is just wonderful, particularly about the life of birds. I really enjoyed it. Are you planning to write another book?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I definitely will be writing another book.
A memoir again, or a different form of book?
Yes, yeah, it's a memoir, but it's sort of maybe slightly broader than just me this time. But yes, it will be another book, and hopefully you'll be able to read it next year.
Well, there you are. Great stuff. That brings us to a question from Catherine online. She says, I really liked The Salt Path, first book, but wondered how much help you had in the writing of it, as you hadn't published a book before. Presumably meaning after the point where you submitted what you had written privately for Moth, and it was turned into a book. Was there much editing? Was there much changing of it?
Yeah, I wrote it completely, the whole thing, and that's what went to Penguin. And when it came to the editing process, it was very, very light. We adjusted one chapter, but mainly on the whole, it was just very superficial stuff that got changed. So more or less, the Salt Path is more or less as it was written in the first place. So.
And what about The Wild Silence? Was it different than having, an audience that you're actually writing for the second time? Did that make it harder? And you were going backwards in your life, and you were talking about your earlier relationship and so on.
Yeah, it was a much harder book to write. I started to write it, and I couldn't write it because it felt as if all I was writing was just a sequel, and that wasn't what I was trying to say. So I just stopped writing it, and then I was sort of running out of time really to hand it in, and I realised that actually I had to go back in order to go forwards. I had to go back to my childhood before I could take the book forwards, and when I realised that, then the whole process became a completely different thing. But it was quite difficult with that sort of expectation of people who had already read The Salt Path, whether or not I could do it again, because The Salt Path was the first thing I'd written. I didn't know if I could write anything else or not. So it was a little bit difficult in that respect. But then after a while, I realised that I had to put all thoughts of who might read it aside, and I had to write it in the same frame of mind that I wrote The Salt Path, as if nobody was going to read it. And then it became easy. Then it became a really simple process, and I put most of it down in about 4 months. And it was much easier then, when really it was about the way I thought about writing rather than the actual writing itself.
Thank you. Is there a question on the floor here now? Anybody else? Yes. We'll just take this one now. Thank you.
Can I ask a very, very trivial question? Why is Moth called Moth?
Moth.
Which is probably the question that everybody wanted to ask but didn't dare.
Well, it's a nickname. It's an abbreviation. It's what I've always known him as. It's what his friends used to call him.
What's an abbreviation of?
Well, I'm going to leave that one with you to work out.
You can't say that.
I can.
People are agog.
I can. Just have to think about it. It's so simple when you think about it, but I'll leave it with you.
But why? So why are you reluctant to?
Because I just amuse myself that so few people have realised what his name is when it's so obvious.
Ooh. Right, if anybody's got a suggestion they want to put to Ray before the end of this, just raise your hand. While the camera moves to the gentleman at the back, let me ask you another online question from Lynn. She says, are you aware of a difference when walking, now that you have a bit of security and money, than when you undertook your first walk? Has your attitude changed? It's a good question.
My attitude hasn't changed, but my eating habits have. I've got to say, I did once or twice, mainly on the Pennine Way, get trapped and have to eat noodles on this trip. But on the whole, I've tried to actually eat the occasional vegetable. So yes, it's changed my eating habits. Yeah, which has been great.
Yeah.
It does mean I can have a bath now and then as well.
Yeah.
So that's bliss.
Oh, you lost a lot of weight the first time round, didn't you? You got very trim on
Goodness.
on nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, so I probably should stick to the noodle diet. It did the trick.
Thanks. Next question, please, on the floor.
When you're back home, do you still feel that need to either be in a tent outside or set one up in the sitting room, or does it not matter to you in the same way?
I think I've moved beyond my tent in the house now. I think I've worked it out, that one. But I do occasionally have to put a tent in the garden just now and then, just to have a night out there and hear the birds in the night and the owls and just hear the rain on the tent. But I haven't put the tent up in the house for quite a while now, so maybe I've come to terms with that one.
Thank you. Was there a question up at the back? Yes, right there. Thank you.
Hi, Ray. I wondered if you consider yourself an activist and a climate activist at all?
I wouldn't have said so. I wouldn't have thought of myself as an activist about anything, really. But I've experienced a lot in the climate now. I've spent most of my life outdoors, and I think if it takes activism now to bring people's awareness to how absolutely essential it is that we act right now, not next week or next month, but today, then I could become an activist really easily, I think. Or maybe I already am and I don't actually realise it, I don't know. But I think the climate is the biggest issue that we have at the moment. It's bigger than national boundaries, it's bigger than religion, it's bigger than colour or race or European economics. It's bigger than absolutely anything. And I've walked through the country and I've seen changes in our country that have happened far quicker than scientists realised that they should, or have forewarned us that they would. And I think if we don't acknowledge that, and we don't all acknowledge that right now, then we're all in a pretty difficult place. So I think we should all be activists, to be honest. I don't think it should be me. I think it should be everybody should realise this and become. We all need to be activists in order to change this thing before it's beyond anyone's changing.
Your books, Ray. Yeah, the audience here likes that very much. Your books have had a great effect on a lot of readers. What's been the most gratifying thing for you about sharing your experiences in the way that you have, and also possibly the challenges of putting information and things that are just so personal to you out there for everybody?
Funny thing, really. When I wrote The Salt Path, like I said, it was just for Moth. So when it was published, and barely changed before it was published, there was so much personal information in there that maybe had I thought about thousands of people reading it, I might not have written. I don't know. But then when I've been to lots of events now, when I'm in person, and people have responded in such a way as if they actually know me now from having read that book, and to a great degree they do, because a lot of the worst of me is in that book. Then then actually it's been really good because that's opened up a conversation with people where people now feel very, very happy to share their stories with me. And it's been amazing to find that actually we're not so different as human beings. We're all the same. We all share those same emotions and fears and the same drivers in life. We all care about our families. We all care about similar things. And that's been, for me, a really, really fundamental changer in my life, because I was such a, I don't know what the word would be, introverted, certainly not gregarious, certainly not a very outgoing or communicative person. So to find that I could then share my story with people and for them to share theirs with me has changed my whole feeling about other people, about humanity, I think.
And how does sorry, finish what you're going to say.
No, go on, it's fine.
Yeah, sorry, because we're just coming to the end. I just want to ask a couple more things. How does Moth feel about his, his medical condition, his ups and downs, being out there for everybody to read? I mean, do you ever get a sort of indication from him that he wishes she would shut up?
No, actually, strangely, he's actually embraced the fact that talking about his condition is in a way, it's really quite helpful to other people who have that condition, because it's such a rare thing. It's something that doesn't get talked about, and so many people get diagnosed with it and have no idea what happens next, or where to go next, or how to think about that diagnosis even. And so many people have got in touch with him to say, "Oh, I've just been diagnosed with this. Can I talk to you?" And that's been great for him in so many ways, to share that with other people who are in the same position. So,
have the doctors acknowledged that he has, and you have been right in the way that you've tackled this? Have they changed their view? Is there something there that other people with a similar condition can genuinely do to follow him and be encouraged about the future?
I don't know if they've actually acknowledged that what he's doing can change his condition, but they have acknowledged that certainly a huge increase in physio can help people a lot more. They have acknowledged that there is something going on, but they don't know really what it is. But it's difficult for doctors because they have to work on a huge body of research of what has come before, on research on top of research, and it's only then that they can make a recommendation. So until that research gets done, then they can't recommend that to other people. But they can say time spent outdoors is going to help your mental health. They can say, the physios for sure would say, a lot more physio is a lot more helpful than a small amount of physio. So until a lot more evidence is available from research, they can't actually recommend it. But they do sort of privately acknowledge that people could maybe take more control over their health than they do.
Raynor, it's been an absolute joy talking to you. I'm afraid we've run out of time now, and that does bring our conversation at the Edinburgh International Book Festival to an end. Thank you to everybody for your questions, and huge thanks to Ray for joining us. Remember, you can buy her 2 brilliant books, The Salt Path and The Wild Silence, both by Penguin, at the Festival Bookshop. That's either online or in the physical bookshop in the old fire station round the corner from Edinburgh College of Art here. Both are wonderful reads. You won't regret buying them. But please, for now, give a big final thank you to the wonderful Raynor Winn for talking to us today.
Thank you.